Hi everyone. I have a bit more than 50 minutes to discuss about Spring Security today and hopefully answer all your questions. But in case I won't be able to answer all your questions, you can find me the rest of the day anyway. And of course, you can find me on social media. I'm Laurențiu. Most of you who know me might know me because of my YouTube channel or one of the books I wrote. But if you didn't follow me already, you are welcome to do that. And of course, you can ask me the questions online as well anytime. Today we are going to discuss about the latest changes in Spring Security. Spring Security is the de facto framework for securing Spring applications. That's something you probably know already. Who is working with Spring here? Most of them. Who is securing their apps with Spring Security? So again, most of you. Who uses already the latest version, or at least 3-point-something Spring Boot, and just a few of you. And that's really good because it means that you might actually learn something today. So we discuss about the latest changes. People ask me, what do you mean by latest? Because it's not really obvious, no? I do define it as what ChatGPT doesn't know already. So normally, if you ask ChatGPT about these changes or maybe work with Copilot, you might not find out about all this. So hopefully that will be useful for you. So I will show you on a few slides, and then we are going to work on an application or a very small demo project where we are going to upgrade it ourselves. You will see that is not that difficult after all. And then we'll hopefully, if we have the time, maybe work on an authorization server, which is one of the latest projects in the Spring ecosystem and related, of course, to Spring Security. So if you haven't already upgraded your app, you might still be using the Web Security Configurer Adapter class that has been here for many, many, many years. And if you do upgrade your application to the latest Spring Boot version, you will have the surprise that this class doesn't exist at all. So it has completely been removed, not only deprecated. It has been deprecated somewhere around Spring Boot 2.7, and then it has been completely removed. So you cannot extend it anymore. And that's a very important and maybe the basics of all the changes, because it used to be the way you configure the things. No, you were extending the Web Security Configurer Adapter, and then you had to override the configure method, use the HTTP security parameter, and configure everything. Now, fortunately, the HTTP security is still there, which means you don't have to learn again how to configure your applications. But it changed a little bit in terms of how you plug it in. So instead of having to override the method and extend the class, now you can simply plug it in through a bin in the Spring context. And that's great because it makes it easier to test for the first, and then, of course, it gives it a little bit of modularity, so your application is more maintainable. You don't have to extend the class. No, you don't have to extend the class, so you just plug something in and you can mock it when you want that. You can make sure that your security configurations are well done and they maybe are not affected by different changes in your application or in versions of your dependencies. So that's the first change that you have to do. And then, of course, you will need somehow to put something in the Spring context that's called the security filter chain. And you do that very easily because the HTTP security now provides you a build method that returns the object that you configure within this instance. And then you will have the surprise that there is no more authorized requests method anymore. From this point of view, well, it's not that a big change because the only thing that really literally changed is the name, which is now authorized HTTP requests. I think it makes more sense because when we use the authorized requests, we were actually thinking about HTTP requests because this is endpoint level authorization that we were configuring here. But that's not it. You will actually observe that you cannot chain the methods anymore. So a lot of you might have been used to do that, and it was one of the preferred ways of configuring Spring Security by chaining the configurations. Now, if you want to do that, you will actually use a parameter to the method, which is a customizer. You can see there is implemented with a Lambda function because the customizer interface is a functional interface. However, be very careful. I do not recommend you to always use Lambda expressions, where if you have an expression like as simple as this one, which is on a row, maybe it makes sense because it's clear enough. But who uses Spring Security, you might know that usually the authorization configurations are very long. So maybe you don't want to have it in the configuration class, but you want to plug it out completely, and you have a class that implements that and separates completely the whole configuration, so that now your configurations classes for the security part at least become a little bit smaller, shorter, in size, and you can see easier what you need to find, and you can, if you want to look it in depth, then you can go directly where that is implemented. So don't use necessarily the Lambda expression if you have a longer, which is most likely the case, which you have a longer implementation, do separate your implementation properly to have your app more maintainable. And there are no more matcher methods, so no AND matchers and MVC matchers, which is wow, because we were used to, like, even now, search how to secure an endpoint on Stack Overflow. You will find a lot of answers with AND matchers. Now, this is quite, the matchers method, I didn't really like them, because you see, first of all, you had the AND and MVC matchers. I want to focus on this too. The reason I didn't like them is because many people didn't know the difference between AND matchers and MVC matchers. And a lot of people simply relied on AND matchers just because they found them on forums, Stack Overflow, whatever you search on Google. How do I secure an endpoint? Use an AND matcher. I'm really curious, who in the room here knows the difference between AND matchers and MVC matchers? You are using that, no? You are using AND or MVC matchers. Who's using AND matchers? AND matchers? Come on, sit. And don't want to raise your hands. MVC matchers, then? If you use Spring Security and use an older version, you use one or the other, for sure. And if you don't know what the difference is, you might end up with actually thinking you secure an endpoint, but you don't secure it in the end. So that's pretty bad. So it is the case of most of the developers using Spring Security. I've seen that in a lot of projects, simply because they were using the method just because it was in an example on somewhere, and it seems it's working, but it wasn't really securing completely their endpoint. So now, fortunately, you will only have one choice, which is called request matchers. And you don't have so much confusion about it. If it doesn't work, you will find it. Another change is the access method. You know, I hated the access method is because it always forced you to use a spell expression. As you see it there, the only difference that in practice, it wasn't that simple. You wouldn't use the access method just to put an is authenticated there. I'm pretty sure about that. And if I go somewhere in a project and I find an access method, it usually uses a very large expression, or maybe 3, 4, 5, or even more lines. And you know what's difficult with spell expressions? Debugging. It's very difficult if you have something that you want to test or something you want to debug. It's not that easy to debug on a spell. So I'm not a fan of using the access method. And whenever I'm using, for example, a pre-authorized or a post-authorized annotation, which is also something that you find in many, if not most of the applications, if not, probably I would be too absolute to say all of them. But if you do use even pre-post annotations, and of course they use spells, avoid using large expressions. If you have a large expression, move the logic in a class. What the access method uses now is an implementation of a contract named authorization manager. And instead of forcing using a spell, you can use any implementation of this contract and put it as an instance there in the access method. So you can literally implement the rules in Java, in plain Java. You don't have to use spell for that. Naturally, it would have been too difficult if, when upgrading from a version to another, you would have been forced to use Java code and rewrite all the spells which might work in your case, so you don't have to rewrite them. So to still be compliant with the latest version and be backwards compatible, the Spring Security provides now also the implementation called Web Expression Authorization Manager, which does exactly what previously Access was doing. It uses spell. So if you are upgrading that and you are lazy, or you might simply don't want to change your spell to Java code, then you can use the Web Expression Authorization Manager instead. And this is it, yeah. Of course, this is an implementation of the authorization manager, but as I said, you can create your custom one. The last of the changes is also the smallest. we were used to use the enable global method security to enable annotations such as pre-authorized, post-authorized, pre-filter, post-filter, secured, and roles allowed. But we always had to use a flag. And today, the pre-post annotations are probably in all the cases, I would say 99.99% used. So it doesn't really make sense to have to put it on true because it's a convention at the moment. We can consider it a convention. So the annotation changed completely. Now it's called enable method security, and the pre-post enable flag is defaulted to true because it's the convention, so you don't have to use it anymore to enable that. Before going to the next, okay, hopefully you can help me to make it work again. Because I would like to upgrade with you. Do you want me to put it on and off, or? Okay. Because I would like to upgrade an app together with you. Okay. Fine. Thank you. So I have here an application, as you can see, it's a very small one. We don't focus on the code, we focus only on the security configurations. It uses Spring Boot 2.6 point something. It uses Java 7, Java 17. Yeah. And let's try to upgrade it to some newer version, like 3.1.4, for example. So in case I do that, I want to first refresh my POM XML. Before diving into the security configurations and trying to upload them, I think there is one more thing that changed in Spring Boot. That is the route to MySQL, which I think it shouldn't work. But let's try and see it. Yeah, exactly. So now this one changed, but yeah, I know not related to our demonstration here, but I want to make it work. No, I want to make it compile, because otherwise you won't believe me that everything is in place. So now, if I did that, and in my POM XML, I'm finally using Java 21 and one of the latest versions of Spring Boot, and I dive into my security configurations, they no longer compile, which is expected. Now, what should I do? Let's start with the beginning. The first and the biggest change would be the extension of the web security configure adapter. As I told you, this class doesn't exist anymore. So what shall I do with it? So, of course, remove it. But if I remove it, of course, I can't override the method anymore. But we know that overriding is not the case. Now, what you do is put a bin in the context. So let's simply just try replacing this with a bin annotation instead. And if we replace it with a bin annotation, then, of course, then we need to return something. And what do we return? It's a security filter chain. Then the method should return something, the security filter chain. But fortunately, it's very easy to do that, because the only thing you need to do is call the build method. Still not compiling. Of course, it doesn't compile, because one of the things that changed is that you cannot chain the configurations anymore. So now all the methods that help you with any kind of configuration, either it's authentication, either it's authorization, or any other protection mechanism like CORS or CSRF that Spring Security provides, comes with a customizer interface. So I can't simply just go here and continue. I need to provide a parameter. All the methods that don't have this parameter have been also removed. So if I don't have, like, for example, in this case, HTTP basic doesn't have any configuration, what I can do is either implement it with a Lambda expression that does nothing, or to be a little bit nicer, you can use this with default static method, which does exactly the same thing for you. Like, it creates a customizer that does nothing. Yeah. Now, I have to do the same for all the others. So do you see here, first of all, authorized requests, you have seen already. There is no authorized request method, first of all, in place. So I need to replace it with the one that exists now. And this one, of course, doesn't have the version with no parameters. So I do need to provide the customizer. I would be able to provide the customizer with defaults, of course, but this would not be compliant to my actual implementation. So in this case, I do really have some configuration. So instead of chaining it after the method, that is something we used to do, I have to change it into a customizer. To be quick and dirty, I'm gonna do that now using a Lambda expression, which is fine. But what I've told you a little bit earlier, in your apps, you do have larger configurations, so it probably makes sense to create a separate class and not necessarily use a Lambda expression, okay? It all depends on what you consider to be clean coding, and we already had Victor discussing today about clean coding, so you know a lot more about it, and a lot more than I could have told you anyway. So now, MVC matchers, it doesn't exist anymore. What do we replace it with? Is now called request matchers. And of course, the access method, it doesn't look like that, no? I have two options. Well, in this case, I know, it's a stupid example. It's a very simple one. You will never use the access method just to put an is authenticated by there, but take it as a demonstration to show you how to upgrade. And if you want to keep your spell, you have two options. No, you either change your logic, put it in Java code, you create a new class extending the authorization manager interface. That's something you can do. And if you don't want to do that, if you are simply lazy or you don't have the time, maybe you don't need at all to change the way your configuration looks like, you want to keep it in spell, you can use the web expression authorization manager implementation that provides you with the same functionality that the previous access method was doing, that is using spell expressions. The CSRF, like any other method that you could use to configure something, also is missing now the implementation without parameters. So the same thing that you did, you have to do here as well. Again, I will use a Lambda expression. You will probably have a longer configuration. You want to move it in a separate class. And wherever you see ANT or MVC, this is just a naming difference. So I didn't put it on my slides, but it's also a change. You have to replace it with this method that does exactly the same thing, but is named differently to be consistent with all the others, because you want things to be consistent. That makes sense, no? The course configuration was already in place, and the only thing now I need to change to be compliant with everything that's new in Spring Security is the enable global method security, which is now called enable method security. Now, when I did that, you could have seen that immediately IntelliJ changed the color of this parameter here, because being already defaulted to true, this code now is redundant, so you can simply take it out. And if you don't believe me that this is true by default, you can go into its implementation and see that indeed for the pre-post enabled is defaulted to true. Mind that for the other two, which is secured enabled, which was enabling for you the secured annotation, and the JSR250 enabled, that was enabling the roles allowed annotation, they are not considered convention. It's recommended you upgrade them to a pre-post annotation, and because of that, they are still defaulted to false. So it forces you to put that just to see that, hey, something is fishy there. We recommend you to do something about it and upgrade your app to use the pre-post annotations. So it wasn't that difficult after all in the end. Now, the real stuff that came, the real juicy stuff, the real sweet stuff in Spring Security is the authorization server. And I'm pretty sure for the next question, the answer will most likely be no to most of you, but let's test it. Who is actually working with the new authorization server already? Exactly what I meant. Just a few of you. Okay, fine. This is, to be honest with you, my favorite. And the reason is my favorite is because if you were asking me, and I got this question a million times on different channels, 2 years ago, if you were asking me, how do I implement an authorization server with Spring, I didn't know how to answer it properly. Because there was no right way, no completely right way to say, hey, you should do this and that, this or that. Why? We used to have a way to implement an OAuth authorization server with a separate dependency. Some of you might remember, if you have used those annotations, enable authorization server, enable resource server. These dependencies have been completely deprecated at some point, and the recommendation was not to use them. With the resource server, there was no problem because everything related to the resource server has been moved to Spring Security itself. So you now, and you already had at that time, the possibility to, instead of, as you've seen here, the HTTP basic. No, you could have used the OAuth 2 resource server, and that's it. Fine enough. No other dependency needed for that, and no enable resource server needed for that. But what do you do with the authorization server? Well, initially it was thought that it's not such a need for that. No, because you have Keycloak, you have Okta, you have plenty of options out there to implement an authorization server in your organization. However, it seems that still there are a lot of organizations who want to implement their custom authorization server. Reasons for that, there are many, and some of you might agree with them, some of you might not agree with them. Still, as a developer or as an architect, you need to serve your organization. So if someone decides, I need to implement a custom authorization server, you need to implement a custom authorization server, whichever the reasons are. Okay, but how do you do that? How do you do that with Spring Security? Well, as I told you, 2 years ago, there was no right answer. However, because there was request, the team from Spring Security started to work less than 2 years ago on a new framework that allows you to build an authorization server. Now, it's in a really mature phase, and a lot of bugs have been solved, and it complies with probably almost everything in the OpenID Connect protocol. You can configure it easily, and what we can try to do in the last half of our today's talk is implement ourselves a minimal authorization server. So you can see that in hopefully no more than 20 minutes, we should be able to have the minimal implementation. Just for you to have an idea before I start, I would like to dive you through what we're going to do. We have one dependency for that. As you will see, we don't even need to touch it ourselves because Spring Initializer already contains it, so it's recognized as a mature Spring ecosystem project. And then what we're going to do is implement the authorization server of a standard system. This is what we're going to do, this stuff here. And to do that, these are the components that you need to customize. It's true that not all of them need to be customized in all the cases. So for example, key pairs management, you do need key pairs if you have non-opaque tokens, such as JVT tokens, for example, or if you use OpenID Connect, because in that case, you will definitely have an ID token. But if you, for example, use opaque tokens, then you don't need a key pair management, because in that case, we are using introspection. So not all of these components are needed all the time, but normally it's this that you will have to customize, and that's what I'm gonna do now. So let's try to do that together. Can you see my screen? Yeah, you can. So go in the project, Spring Initializer, authorization server. Okay, doesn't care if it's Gradle or Maven. If you want, we can use Java 21, not that if matters at the moment. But what you can see, I already have one in that folder. Okay, fine enough. What you can see is that, first of all, let's add the web and the Spring Security dependencies. And then, here it is, the authorization server dependency directly in Spring Initializer. So you don't even need to think about the dependency itself. But that's not the greatest thing. The greatest thing is that being there, it simply means that this project, it is considered mature enough. So you can use it being no worried, let's say, that you will not be supported in the future or something like that. So while things are being built here and my dependency is being downloaded, shouldn't take more than a few seconds, hopefully, if the internet connection works properly. And then we can start, and by a simple configuration class, implement this minimum authorization server ourselves. Come on, network connection, please help me now, build model. Just a little bit. Oh, and by the way, guys, if this is actually compiling now, let me give you also the good news. So I will give this book. It's a paper copy of my third book. for that, stay till the end of the presentation. I will give you a QR code. You will scan it. Just put your name there. I promise I don't do anything with the name. I will do a randomize at the end, and some of you will get this book if they want it. And I see this stuff compiled, but since I've learned the important news of this book from my friend Ottavio, is a new book on persistence in Java applications, and you know how persistence how important persistence is. I do recommend you learn whatever you can about the persistent layer and how to optimize it. So just want to say that because we had the time. And now that everything got built in the end, let me actually create a config package and project config class. Well, it's a configuration class, so then what I need to do is annotate it with configuration. No enable authorization server annotation, no extension of any class. We need to use two security filter chains, however, to configure the authorization server part and the web part of the application. So the first of one, the security filter chain for the authorization server would look like that. Of course, you already know it's just the standard security filter chain, similar to the one that we've used in the previous application. So the only thing I need to do is get the parameter, the HTTP security parameter, and return the security filter chain. Then, of course, we have the bin annotation that assures us that this will be in the context. You want to start from something, so what I do recommend you is you start from the default configuration and then customize it with your own. So for example, this is the default configuration. Now you can do whatever you want on that. To do that, you can get the customizer, the configurer. And now, for example, if I want to enable the OpenID Connect protocol, I can just use the OpenID Connect method. Similar to all the other customizable methods in Spring Security, now it gets a customizer as a parameter, but I will use the with defaults one to make the things shorter. So depending on what you want to do now, if you only want to use the client credentials grant type where you don't need a login, you can simply skip what I'm going to do now. But if you want to have, for example, a login page, then you would also want to make sure that for any request that lacks authentication, you will be redirected to the login page. So in that case, you need to provide with the authentication entry point. And you can do it like this. Of course, the path can be different in case you have customized it, but in my case, being the default, I will use the simply login. Now, you do the similar one for customizing the authorization rules. So we can call this one app, for example, app security filter chain, and the same way you can build it and return it. If you have a couple, however, remember to provide the order in which they will be applied. So we need to use the order annotation for that as well. Now, what do we do here? Of course, one of the things that I want to do is tell my application what we'll use for the authentication. Let's say we want the user to put their credentials in a simple form, so then I will enable the form login. And then, of course, I will use the authorized request. See, this is why I hate Copilot. It simply tells me I should use MVC matchers. Nah, that doesn't work anymore, Copilot. I'm sorry for that. But, of course, you can use now, as you know, the any request authenticated for the moment, just to put everything on secured, and that's it. But normally I would have the authorized request, no MVC matchers, no unmatchers anymore. And yeah, now what do I want to use? I want to use the authorization code grant type. That means I need both clients and users. Fortunately, the users management is very simple because you already know how to do it. It's the simple user detail service which has been there since the beginnings of Spring Security. So just put your user detail service implementation, and that's it. And yeah, in my case, I can simply use an in-memory user detail service there just to save time because it's only a demonstration. But normally you will take your users from somewhere, maybe a database, maybe an URL, maybe, I don't know. So user details, let's actually provide it with a user. Password, very secure password for our user, 1, 2, 3, or 5, yeah. And it needs to have at least an authority, and that's it. So that's our user. Let's make sure it's managed by this in-memory user detail service. Then there is no user or client management without secrets and passwords. So normally what you need to do is use a password encoder. So I need to configure my password encoder as well. And like all the demonstrations, you will use something that's called the no-op password encoder. Now, make sure you never use the no-op password encoder in a real-world application because, as the name suggests, this one doesn't do anything on your password. So it's not encrypting, not encoding, not doing anything. But it's great for examples. And now we have users. If we have users, it's not enough, because if you go back to my diagram here, you see we have a user, but we also have a client. So we need, my authorization server doesn't only need to know about the users, but it needs to know about the clients as well. So to do that, you will use a component that in the new authorization server is called registered client repository. And this can be a little bit confusing because if some of you have used the previous way of implementing the authorization server, you might know that in that one was actually called the client details service, which made a little bit more sense because it was kind of similar and consistent with user details service. I don't know to tell you exactly why the guys decided to change the namings, but true is that now the name is registered client repository, and what you register is called a registered client. So let's do that. It provides us, however, fortunately, with an easy builder, and then you also have an in-memory implementation if you need it. And normally, again, this is an interface. You would implement it, you would override it, and you would define your own way to grab the data, probably from somewhere like a database. Yeah, and then all the details about the client, you need a minimum of details. For example, you might need a client ID. No, you might need a secret. Why I say might and you don't necessarily need, because it really depends on how you are using it. If you use it with Pixie, you don't necessarily need to have an authentication, but you can have an authentication if you really want. Like, for example, I can still choose to use HTTP Basic, for example, if I want, even if I use Pixie. In such a case, you would need to have a secret as well, but if you don't choose that, then that's not needed anymore. And then, of course, you have the redirect URI, and this can be like literally any URI. Let's say we use the site from Devox, which is the parent conference of Voxed. Of course, that page doesn't exist, so probably if I will try my code, I will end up having 404, but you would be able to see, for example, that the authorization code is there. Now the scope, I can use read, of course, but normally if I use OpenID Connect, I would probably go with an OpenID Connect scope, like OpenID, for example. And what else do I missing here? Of course, the grant types. So I need to have at least one grant type. Now, you can choose any of the authorization code, refresh token, bearer, device code has been implemented in one of the latest versions only. Password grant type is, however, deprecated. Remember, you should never use the password grant type. And of course, you should never use the implicit grant type either. So let's say we are choosing to use the authorization code grant type. If you want to use multiple authorization codes for a client, that's possible. And for example, if I want to have a refresh token, because that's something that we very often use with the authorization code grant type, then you can simply add a refresh token, as you can see here. The last mandatory bin that I need to add is the authorization server settings bin, which will allow me to configure very general stuff, like, for example, the endpoints, if I want to do that. I will simply just use the default in this case, but normally if I want to use my custom endpoints, then this is the way to do it. Here, if you use something, you'd be able to change like the key set endpoint, token endpoint, authorization endpoint, XYZ endpoint, okay? So all the general settings configuration you do through this bin. As I told you, I might skip, for example, the definition of the keys management, which is done through a JWK source. That's the name of the interface you'd have to implement and provide the keys probably from a vault. I would recommend you have, of course, multiple keys. But if I don't want, because, for example, this is only a simple demonstration, I can use the predefined key source, which simply creates a new key when I start the application. Of course, it's not a realistic implementation. It would not work with a real application, because that would mean that every time the application starts, you have new keys, no? So you would not be able to have some real tokens that work after the container restarts. So it sounds that it's not feasible. So normally you will implement that if you use non-opaque tokens and if you need to sign your tokens. But just for you to know, if you just implement it for the demo purposes, you can use the one Spring Boot provides by default. That happens in one of the latest versions. It used not to happen, but now it does, so you can see that here. So I can prove, now normally I can prove that my server works properly and that it correctly implements the OpenID Connect protocol. You can see me here calling the well-known OpenID configuration endpoint. That's an endpoint that exists in all the authorization servers that correctly comply with OpenID Connect. And you can see in my postman here all the configuration that you need, stuff that you need to know to work with this authorization server, including the URLs, the endpoints such as the authorization endpoint, the token endpoint, the keys endpoint, device authorization endpoint if you use that grant type, user info, which is very important and essential. If you use OpenID Connect, you have the user info. Remember, that's one of the differences between using OpenID Connect or simply using the OAuth specification. We can test many more than that. Let's say I want to call the keys endpoint. You can see funny is you have, as I told you, you have a key pair, only one. This is the demo key pair. Normally, that is what you would have need to override, but you see that my keys endpoint works, and that's because I have configured my authorization server to use OpenID Connect. Why does it do that? Because even if I don't provide, and even if I would use, say, opaque tokens in this case, it would still need to have it would still need to have a key for the ID token. No, the ID token is mandatory, and it's always a JVT in the OpenID Connect, so it can't stay without a key. Now, if you really want us to test it, which we can, I have already defined the URLs for us, so we don't lose the time. Just as an idea, I put them on a slide as well, so you can see the authorization endpoint. You've seen where you take it from. The parameters are the ones specified in the OAuth specification. So you provide the response type, the client ID, the scope that you want to request the redirect URI, and in case you are using Pixie, of course, you need to provide the code challenge, and then when you ask for the token, you need to provide what? The code verifier, of course. And this is for the token when you provide the code verifier. Yeah. So normally, if I'm going here and I'm putting this, I have to log in. If I remember correctly, my user is Bill, password is 12345, and then some error here. Yeah, something that I've missed probably. Normally, it should have redirected me most likely. Oh, this is the problem, see? HTTP, and I think here I have used HTTPS. That simple letter is why it's not working. This is why I get at least twice a week questions on my YouTube channel about, hey, my authorization endpoint doesn't work. Always the answer is, be careful on everything in the parameters you used. Just one letter can make it not work. And as you can see by default, if I didn't enable extended logging, there is nothing in the logs, so very difficult to debug. No? So if you really can't find what's wrong, then what you can do is enable the logging and debug a little bit on it. But normally, what I found out is it's usually always about at least one mistake, one typo in the parameters that you are using. So let's try again. Maybe I have another one. I don't know. I didn't do that on purpose. But the idea is that that's actually what you should check for in case that happens. Now, if you want an extended, now it works now, okay? So you see it's a 404 because the page doesn't exist, but you can see that it properly gave me the authorization code here, and if you want further to prove that you can access a token, just use the authorization code for that and get a token, and you got a token, okay? So it works. Remember that the authorization code is only usable once, even if you failed with it for any reason, like you used a misparameter or something, you can't reuse the same. You always have to create a new authorization code. Don't try to reuse it, because then you will never be able to obtain the token anyway. Yeah. Now, we don't have a lot of time, and it's almost time for lunch. I don't want you to look at me with hungry eyes. So I will take the questions soon, and then I will allow you go and eat something. And I'm pretty sure you want more details, and I'm pretty sure you are interested in learning more about the authorization server and Spring security. There is a lot more content about that on my YouTube channel for free. And of course, you can anytime also get my book, Spring Security in Action. I do recommend you the second edition, of course, which will be out soon. When I say soon, it's probably a couple of months or so. It's finished, but it needs to get edited and printed, and that's it. With that being said, I want to remind you to follow me on social media, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you. And while I'm taking your questions, this is the QR code, which I will use in a few moments to find who will get this book. Find out who will get. Questions? Everyone's busy with scanning the QR code. Okay, that's good. Okay. So, do we have any question? No question. Either I talk too fast, either you already knew everything, either I was really, really clear and you learned a lot and you don't need any to ask. Yeah, I have a question there.
They have this functionality. If they had the functionality to add extra claims to the JWT.
Yes, of course. And it's actually a very, very good question. It's actually a very easy way. It's called a JWT customizer. You just plug the bin in, and it's out of the box. So it's only one bin to be added. It's instantaneous.
And could you relate it with the user details?
Yes, it comes. So the method comes with the context, which is everything you have in the security context. So you basically can customize it with any information that you already have in the application at that moment. And it's only a bin that you add. That's a very simple way to do that.
Thanks.
Welcome. You actually, you can find an example on that on my YouTube channel. And it's one of the things I've demoed in the presentation I had earlier this year at Spring 1. If you find the recording of that, you will see me doing exactly that, customizing the JWT token. Okay, another question there.
Like in the
one more time, please, with the mic.
Did anything change in the way you configure things in the application YAML file, like I don't know, the routes and the patterns, what to secure, what not secure?
Yes, so a very good question. Can we write a large part of the configuration in a YAML file or in a properties file? The answer is yes. Why haven't I shown you that today? Because I wanted to show you how to customize, like how you really customize stuff when you need it. Because normally in real world applications, my experience is that relying only on the default configuration that you can do in the YAML file is in most cases not enough. So for a demo purpose, I could have simply just configured everything that you have seen me doing today in the configuration file. I could have configured it from the properties or YAML file, but I decided not to do that because what you are usually most interested in is how to customize yourself those components. But yes, you could do that. Okay? And should we see who registered here? Ooh, a lot of people. Bianca, why are you 2 times here? I can see that. Oh my God. Okay, I will say this. I didn't. It's my mistake. I didn't add something. I will leave it like this. It's you got me. Fine. Let's see if you are still lucky enough to get that. So fast now, everyone. Oh my God. Okay, 42. Fine. So 2 to 42. Okay, that's what I'm taking. 2 to 42. Yeah. 42. And 9. Sergio. Okay, guys, thank you very much, Sergio. I'm waiting for you here to get the book. The others have an excellent lunch and an excellent rest of the conference. Enjoy.